Severe fuel leak while flying over the Atlantic. Both airplane engines shut down mid-air. The longest unpowered emergency landing in history, covering 120 kilometers. What led the Airbus A330 into such a tragedy? A peaceful departure. On August 23, 2001, Air Transat Flight 236 departed Toronto around midnight, headed for Lisbon, carrying 293 passengers and 13 crew members. The two-engine Airbus A330, only 2 years old, was fully fueled for the over 7-hour transatlantic journey. That night, the weather was good, the skies were stable, and everything proceeded as on hundreds of other flights the two pilots had executed. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Pish, with over 2 decades of flying experience, and First Officer Dirk de Jager, a young but steady pilot, were at the controls of Air Transat's most modern aircraft. All parameters were normal and the systems ran smoothly. There was no indication of the unprecedented series of failures ahead. At cruising altitude, the A330 crossed the North Atlantic in silence, with only the steady sound of the engines in the night. For hours into the flight, they were halfway from Canada, drawing closer to Europe. Everything was stable, as pilots often say when things are under control. But beneath that perfect exterior, a minor error from a previous maintenance procedure was silently waiting. In just a few hours, it would force the entire flight into a situation no pilot wants to face: losing all fuel over the ocean. The first sign of trouble, 4 hours after leaving Toronto, as the A330 was crossing the Atlantic at over 35,000 feet. First Officer de Jager noticed something wrong. On the display for engine number 2, the right engine, the oil pressure was unusually high, while the oil temperature dropped. These two indicators should never move in opposite directions like that. Pish rechecked the systems. Everything was still operating normally. There was no shaking, no strange noises, and the engine ran smoothly. They consulted the technical fault manual but found no entry matching this situation. Following protocol, the crew contacted the ground technical department in Montreal for verification. However, from over 2,000 kilometers away, they received only vague advice. It might be a sensor failure. The engine is fine, just keep flying. Pish knew that sensor errors were common. He decided to maintain speed, continue the journey to Lisbon, and make a note of the problem to check upon landing. No one in the cockpit knew that, beneath the metal casing of the right engine, fuel was leaking out at an alarmingly rapid rate. A false warning about oil had concealed a real danger, and that was when everything began to spiral out of control. The fuel leak. When the investigation began, experts quickly noticed an unusual detail. The aircraft's right engine was not the original one. A week before the flight, it had been replaced with a temporary spare engine, of the same model but a different technical version. During the installation, technicians had difficulty connecting the fuel and hydraulic lines. Instead of stopping to request the exact correct parts, they forced 2 incompatible connectors to fit. To the naked eye, the connection seemed sealed. But inside, high pressure created a small gap, just enough for fuel to gradually leak out. On the ground, signs of the leak were almost undetectable. But as the plane flew over the Atlantic, pressure changes and a sharp drop in temperature caused the fuel to begin escaping more rapidly. Fuel vapor spread into the engine bay, coating the pipes and electrical cables. A small spark from the control system or metal friction would have been enough to ignite it. This was not the error of a single individual. It was the result of maintenance pressure, a lack of the correct standard parts, and procedures being cut short due to a demanding flight schedule. A small, seemingly harmless variance was enough to cripple an entire aircraft in the sky. Misunderstanding and error. In the cockpit, everything still seemed normal at the time. There were no fire warnings, no shaking, and no obvious abnormal signals. The A330's fuel management system, one of the most sophisticated at the time, was automatically transferring fuel from the tail compartment to the right wing to maintain balance. To the pilots, this was perfectly logical, as they only saw a slight imbalance between the two wings. But this very automatic mechanism was concealing the real problem. The fuel was leaking out, not just imbalanced. When the fuel imbalance warning appeared, they assumed it was a sensor error, which was not uncommon on long-haul flights. Trusting the machinery, they opened the crossfeed valve to equalize the fuel between the two wings, hoping to correct the imbalance. But at that very moment, all the remaining fuel began to flow towards the leaking side. Just minutes later, the right engine starved of fuel, then shut down completely. The left wing quickly followed. Both engines fell silent over the Atlantic Ocean. What followed was no longer a technical incident. It was the consequence of a chain of misunderstandings. A small maintenance error, an automated system lacking a proper warning, and human trust in seemingly perfect technology. In aviation, that was enough to turn a safe flight into a disaster. Engine shut down. When the clock showed 5:45 Universal Time Coordinated, the crew understood the situation was no longer stable. They decided to divert to Lodges Airport in the Azores, the nearest landing point in the middle of the Atlantic. On the display, the fuel on the right was nearly depleted, and the left side was dropping at an unbelievably fast rate. At first, they thought it was a sensor error, but just minutes later, engine number 2 started losing power, then shut down completely. The plane wobbled in the thin air at an altitude of over 11,000 meters, 35,000 feet. The captain immediately tried to maintain balance and adjust the direction of flight with the remaining engine. But in an instant, the fuel pressure on the left side also fell to zero. Engine number 1 shut down as well. In that moment, the over 180-ton Airbus A330 transformed into a giant glider, silent over the dark Atlantic. All main electrical systems stopped working, leaving only the emergency power from the small wind turbine deployed beneath the fuselage. Every maneuver now had to be performed manually. In the vast expanse, they had to recalculate the trajectory, speed, and approach angle to glide all the way to Lodges. There was no other choice, only absolute precision could save the aircraft. In the world of aviation, that was a moment with no room for error. The unpowered landing, when both engines fell silent, the A330 was still over 100 kilometers from Lodges Airport. With no main electricity or hydraulics, everything now relied on a small device. The emergency wind propeller, called the ram air turbine, RAT. The only thing still capable of providing enough power and pressure for basic control. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Pish and First Officer Dirk de Jager had to manually calculate every maneuver, every bank angle, every remaining meter of altitude. They were controlling a giant metal mass that could only glide with the wind. To approach the runway, they needed to lose altitude quickly but could not lose speed. Pish executed a 360-degree turn over the sea, followed by S-turns, gliding in an S-shape to both reduce altitude and maintain direction toward the airport. With no support systems, all maneuvers were manual, relying on skill and feel. When the runway appeared through the clouds, they were minutes away from survival. At 6:45 Universal Time Coordinated, the wheels touched down on runway 33. The brakes were weak, with no hydraulic assist, and the A330 skidded for nearly 600 meters before stopping. Silence enveloped the cockpit. The aircraft had landed safely, not through luck, but through the experience, cool control, and discipline of two individuals facing the ultimate limits of aviation. Aftermath. When the A330 finally stopped on the Lodges runway, no one in the rescue team believed it had just flown over 120 kilometers with no engines. Everyone survived. Only 16 people were injured, mostly due to the hard impact during landing and the long skid. For an aircraft weighing over 180 tons, that was nearly unimaginable. The subsequent investigation uncovered the entire chain of errors starting from the ground. A borrowed engine of the wrong version had been installed by manually forcing a connection between two different pipe systems. That temporary fix created a fuel leak that no one detected. In the cockpit, the crew was misled by the automatic systems and incorrect signals. No one believed the amount of fuel was truly disappearing. The investigative agency concluded, this incident stemmed from negligent maintenance and operational misunderstanding. Air Transat was fined $250,000 Canadian dollars. But Captain Robert Pish, who safely steered the plane to the ground, was hailed by the entire aviation industry. He received the Superior Airmanship Award in 2002, marking the record for the longest unpowered aircraft glide in history. A story that reminds us that in aviation, the smallest mistake on the ground can lead to the